Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to be waiting just a little bit for people to trickle in. And we'll be starting up in just a few minutes. All right, well, looks like we're about 5 minutes past, so let's get started. Want to welcome everyone. My name is Brandon Cunningham. I'm the community organizer with the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty. We're a broad and diverse coalition of community organization members who are working to bring an end to the death penalty in our state. Today, leaders of color from across our state are here to demand Governor Sisolak and the Nevada Senate pass AB 395, our bill to abolish the death penalty. The death penalty is historically and currently racially biased against minority communities, especially our Black communities. Prejudice is an everyday reality in who gets harsher sentences, who gets arrested, and which communities are most heavily policed. The systemic prejudices throughout the criminal legal system are magnified in our state's use of the death penalty. It doesn't target the worst of the worst, but it targets those least able to defend themselves in court. It's not by accident everyone on death row is so poor they can't afford their legal representation. It's not by accident nearly a quarter of individuals on our death row suffer from brain damage, intellectual disability, or severe mental illness. It's not by accident more than half the people in our row are people of color and 40% are Black, when we only make up 9% of the state's population. We seem to have endless money to pursue punishments that do nothing to keep our community safe while discriminating against people of color, the poor, and the mentally ill. There should be no place for this in our society. You're going to be hearing from various leaders and organizations today who will be sharing their support for AB 395 and why they stand in solidarity against the inhumane death penalty. I'd like to go ahead and start off with Yvette Williams. She's the caucus chair for the Clark County Black Caucus.
Thank you, Brandon. And to all of my colleagues in the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty, thank you for your continued work. And to our legislature, a message to you. We have been asking for the death penalty to be abolished for years, decades, in fact, and this is the closest we've ever gotten. So this message is also for all of you. And we also call on the community to join us by responding to the Nevada legislature and asking that Assembly Bill 395 is heard. We're trying to get it before the Senate. The Nevada legislature is one of only 15 state houses around the country where bills to abolish the death penalty have been introduced in 2021. As you're aware, this issue is not new to Nevadans, and advocates continue to push for legislation that reflects the will of the people. Polls show nationally and in Nevada that the death penalty should be abolished. Most recently, Virginia became the first state in the South to abolish the death penalty. There's good evidence to abolish this archaic law. As of November 8th, 2019, the Innocence Database from Death Penalty Information Center shows 167 exonerations of prisoners on death row in the United States since 1973. Had those executions moved forward, these 167 innocent people would have lost their lives for a crime that they did not commit. Unfortunately, those receiving a sentence of death are disproportionately more often African American than any other race. Almost 40% of those with a death sentence are African Americans in Nevada, while 55% are people of color, not because they commit more serious crime, but sadly because of racism and bias in our justice system. It is most common for a US death sentence to eventually be reversed, and the inmate will remain in prison with a different form of death sentence, life without the possibility of parole. Both Republicans and Democratic appointees have voted to overturn these convictions because they so often involve such issues as evidence withheld from the defense, improper instructions to the jury, or other serious flaws in the original trials and pretrial. This is a nonpartisan issue. A December 3rd, 2014 study commissioned by the Nevada legislature found that the average death penalty case cost $500,000 more than a case in which the death penalty is not sought. The legislative auditor estimated the cost of a murder trial in which the death penalty was sought cost about $1.3 million, whereas cases without the death penalty cost $775,000. It's important to note that there were 74 inmates on death row in 2014. So if we were to multiply those 74 cases by $500,000 in savings, that's $37 million in savings if these trials were not death penalty cases. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your wise words, Yvette. We're going to be switching to Miley Alarcon. She is representing the Immigrant Rights Coalition at Boyd Law School.
Thank you, Brandon. Good afternoon. My name is Miley Alarcon, and I am here today representing the Immigrant Rights Coalition at UNLV Boyd School of Law, where I serve as the Immigrant Community Engagement Director. Our purpose is to defend and advocate for the rights of immigrants in our community through outreach and education, and protect the rights of especially vulnerable immigration community. We're deeply concerned by Nevada's continued use of the death penalty. The death penalty continues to be applied in racially biased ways and is deeply unjust. People of color are disproportionately sentenced to death. African Americans in particular are sentenced to death in Nevada at a rate close to 4 times the percentage of the population. People of color collectively make up to 55% of individuals in death row in Nevada. People of color are also wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death for crimes that they did not commit at higher rates. One of the at least 185 innocent people who have been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death in the United States, more than 64% are people of color, and more than half, 54%, are Black. Of the 2 known death row exonerations that have occurred in the state, both involve people of color. Wrongful convictions happen for many reasons, but eyewitness misidentification is one of the leading causes. Racial misidentification is particularly problematic, as studies have routinely shown that eyewitnesses have more difficulty identifying members of another race. Other leading causes include bad forensics and junk science, police or prosecutorial misconduct, false confessions, and perjury by informants. Another important factor is access to properly trained defense attorneys. A recent UCLA Law Review article found that immigrants are particularly vulnerable to wrongful convictions. Innocent Latino or Hispanic immigrants are more vulnerable to pleading guilty to crimes they did not commit under the threat of deportation. Law enforcement officers have used witnesses' immigration statuses to manipulate their testimony. Even after innocence is established and a conviction is overturned, Latino immigrant exonerees can still face deportation or other immigration issues. One study published by the National Academy of Sciences estimated that 4.1% of the people currently on death row would eventually be exonerated if their executions were delayed indefinitely. We simply cannot tolerate death penalty that is error-prone, risking the lives of innocent people, and is racially biased in its application. The time has come for Nevada to end the death penalty. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Miley. I want to move on to Ms. Roxanne McCoy. She is the current president of the Southern Nevada NAACP. You're still muted.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I would like to begin by echoing the sentiments of my colleagues that spoke previously before me. And I would also like to add that the NAACP nationally as well as locally support this Assembly Bill 395 that is currently in legislation. But we are deeply concerned that the death penalty continues to be disproportionately used against African Americans and other people of color. But our concerns don't just end here. The death penalty also siphons precious public safety resources away from our community, resources that could be used to prevent crime and improve the lives of so many people. These resources Millions of dollars, I might add, in taxpayer money are being used to prop up a symbol that it is racially biased and doesn't deter crime or tangibly help the communities most impacted by violence. It is time to end this charade and end capital punishment in Nevada once and for all. And I hope that you all will stand in agreement with us and work with us in order to abolish the death penalty here in this state. So thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. I have Leslie Turner. She is the Justice Director for the Mass Liberation Project.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Leslie Turner. I'm the Justice Director with the Mass Liberation Project. And that is an initiative within PLAN, which stands for Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada. And as we move forward in this country, and we're trying to build towards a more just society, this requires that we abolish the death penalty. The death penalty is deeply rooted in a legacy of racial oppression and terror. We can trace the direct line from the horror of lynching to today's use of the death penalty. The remnants of our past are still fluid and feed into much of our systemic structures, and especially into the criminal justice system. Black people and other people of color are still overrepresented on death row, and the death penalty continues to be used more frequently when white people are harmed than when Black or Latino people are harmed. The execution of Black men also reinforces harmful narratives of Black dangerousness and Black disposability. These false narratives permeate our culture, fostering racism and harming Black citizens on many levels. Aside from the fact that, one, the state is not capable of determining the value of human life, the potential for, and we have to consider also the potential for the execution of the innocent. Retribution isn't justice. It fails to deter, which is evident if you watch the hearing from AB 395 when it was in the assembly, we heard story after story of just like heinous acts. The October 1st shooting was even mentioned, and none of these situations were prevented nor deterred by the death penalty. With the death penalty in place, we've continued to have numerous mass shootings. So clearly, this isn't actually stopping anybody from doing that. So we have to go a little bit deeper. And I think collectively, we as a society are ready to go a little bit deeper into really thinking about what is justice. I think it's time for us to take a collective look at what justice is, how it's defined, and who defines it. As well as we need to take a look at state spending and funding. In that hearing, there was a mother of a victim who was killed, who she was talking about how $400,000 was spent by the state to resolve a death penalty case. And she was like, that money could have came to the family. That money could have been spent towards healing, towards lifelong therapy for the kids that were left behind in that situation. And I think it's also important to note that there are victims of crime who do not want the death penalty. And in those situations, the state can still pursue that. So again, who is justice for if it's not for the person that was harmed? So again, we have to start looking at these things, and we have to start redefining what is justice. Justice should be about restoration for those who've been harmed. Instead of spending millions of dollars on retribution, we should be spending millions of dollars on families for therapy, healing practices, financial resources, whatever they need to restore them and their family. We have to abandon the myth that justice requires more killing. The idea that more killing will somehow make victims of crime more whole. We know that that is not true. We must chart a new course, and we have to do it together. We must invest in building our communities up. We must support individuals and communities impacted by violence and invest in long-term solutions that improve community safety and healing that's defined by the community rather than offering false promises. We have an opportunity to reshape the landscape of public safety, but again, Public safety has to be defined by the public. We need to focus on solutions that come from the community that's impacted. The death penalty is holding us back from the future we collectively deserve. It is diverting essential resources away from programming and resources that actually work. And it's time to abandon this ineffective relic of the past and step into the future. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Leslie. I mean, you articulated what we're all feeling way better than we could. The next person I have up is Pastor Ender Austin III with Faith in Action in Nevada.
Thank you, Brandon, and you said it well, Leslie. You said it very, very well. Just over my my left shoulder is actually, if you can look in the distance, there is a wreath. In Memphis, Tennessee, celebrate my birthday with my family, and there is the place where a martyr for the work that we do today, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, was slain. And why would I bring up Martin Luther King in a conversation around the death penalty? I'll give you some scripture to back it up. Micah 6:8 says, tells us that he said, he's shown you the way, old man. And this is what the Lord requires of thee, for you to love justice, for you to do mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. And what does Martin Luther King have to do with any of that? When we look at the way that the death penalty and many other punitive measures are meted out by the court, many times, like Leslie says, it is a direct line to the extrajudicial killing of God's sun-kissed people. And if we're to be honest about the reckoning that we face since way before George Floyd, since all the way back to Emmett Till, and even since there were 20-odd Negroes that would found their ways to this shore, we have been in a constant struggle for freedom. And that constant struggle continues if we do not have an honest conversation about what it is that we're doing when we take the life of people who God loves. And I want to be honest with you that love for people is not just about those persons who have a pristine reputation. It's not just about those persons who have done everything correctly. It's not just about those persons who we would invite over to have dinner or Sunday tea at our homes, but it is about every single person. And we have to, like Leslie said, look at ways that we can take the resources that we are misappropriating to really build up a society that really speaks to the values that we hold. I believe that it's true, and you've heard the saying that if you really want to know about my values, look at where my checkbook is. And I want to talk to you a little bit about a study that we learned about some while ago. Back in August of 2001, the New Jersey Supreme Court had a report that said that the death penalty law is more likely to proceed against defendants who kill white victims. And that lets us know that this is not simply about justice for anybody, but the death penalty is absolutely an arm of white supremacy and terrorism in our communities. And we have to be honest with this language. And I'm not going to take up all of your time, but when a time where we are making cuts everywhere in our budget in the state, and we're trying frantically many times to talk about what it is that we're going to do to make sure that my 6 and 9-year-old have resources within their schools. Why, I ask you, are we wasting money on killing people? Why? Why? I want to end with this scripture, and I believe that we're doing the Lord's work by speaking for the least of these. The question was asked in the book of Isaiah. He said, whom shall I send as a messenger to this people? Who will go for us? And the prophet Isaiah answered, and I believe that all of us had answered today, here, my Lord, send me.
Thank you for your time. Ender, I didn't realize you were on vacation. Person I have up next is Maria Teresa Lieberman Praga, the Deputy Director of Battleborn Progress.
Hi, y'all. Thank you for putting this together, Coalition Against the Death Penalty. My name is Maria Teresa Lieberman Parraga, and it's real hard to follow our past few speakers, but not only because they were so eloquent, but they nailed everything exactly. And all of those reasons, and the ones I'll talk about, is why Battleborn Progress, my organization, is a part of this coalition. We have members across the state in Nevada as Battleborn Progress, and we are committed to empowering, engaging, and mobilizing all of those folks and their entire community so we can all together build a state where everyone has a fair opportunity to succeed. And the death penalty is completely incompatible with this mission. The death penalty in Nevada has been disproportionately used to punish the most vulnerable people in our society, including people with severe mental illnesses, intellectual disabilities, brain injuries, histories of serious childhood trauma and abuse, and young people. And even more so disproportionate, it has been used against African Americans and other people of color, as well as people who are poor and those without the financial resources to defend themselves. It is continued to be used, and its continued use has come at a great cost socially, morally, and financially. Continued use of a death penalty system that is racially biased and error prone too often in its application, a system that risks the execution of the innocent and erodes public trust in our legal system, needs to be stopped. It undercuts our commitment to fairness and equal protection under the law. At a cost of millions of dollars per year, the death penalty also diverts significant taxpayer dollars away from programs that we know are far more successful at preventing crime and reducing violence. It also distracts from a much needed conversation about how we can best help our communities that are impacted by violence and what victims of crime really need in the aftermath of violence, because the death penalty is not what they need. As a society, we have lifted up the death penalty as a symbol of justice, but it is a false promise and a major obstacle to transforming the justice system into one rooted in safety, healing, restoration, redemption, and human dignity. In the last 45 years, Nevada has carried out just a dozen executions, and all but one of those people forfeited all of their appeals and volunteered to be executed. These executions did not make us safer. They did not repair the damage that had been caused. They didn't bring families and friends of that were victimized back. It is time we focus our energies on programs that we know work, programs that bring safety and prosperity to our communities, that help build the kind of society where everyone has a fair opportunity to succeed. That is why we are urging lawmakers to end the death penalty in our state and urge the Senate Judiciary Committee to have a hearing, and we look forward to working with them to ensure its passage and signature by Governor Sisolak, because the time for action is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Next up and last, I have Taylor Patterson, the Executive Director with the Native Voter Alliance of Nevada.
Thank you, Brandon. And yes, besides being the Executive Director of Native Voters Alliance Nevada, I am also a member of the Bishop Paiute tribe. I am always remiss, I can't begin anything without mentioning the people that came before me. And so that's very important for me to honor my ancestors by mentioning that. I'll keep my comments brief today because I think everything has already been so well said and eloquently said by other members of the coalition. I think it's very clear that this is a system that is not working for our people. This is a system, as much of our justice system, that targets BIPOC communities, targets those that are low income, and really just does not deter crime. It is an unjust system. And I want to be very clear that to the folks in the Senate and to the governor, that opposing the abolition of the death penalty does not show that you are tough on crime. It shows that you are very, very weak, and you are more beholden to district attorneys than you are to your constituents and to true justice. So I just want to call on everybody to really look at the facts and know that this is not something that belongs in a just, fair society. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. I know we've had a lot of people speak. If we do have any questions from some of the press in attendance, I do want to give the opportunity for you guys to ask them. Feel free to drop any questions in chat, or you can unmute yourselves and ask the person directly.
they're going to make it that easy for us, Brandon, because the facts speak for themselves.
Apparently. Yeah, we're going to give them a little bit of time. I know I have to pay attention to most of my Zooms, so.